Billy Blue, my knight in shining brindle. Welcome to another episode of A Poet Reads to Write. Today, I've got something really special for you. Well, it's really special for me. I'm going to share with you my love affair with the mid-20th-century English painter Stanley Spencer. Stanley Spencer is a painter I have just always loved. But before we get to Spencer, what do you think of my Pink Panther Guernsey? Sport has always been a really important part of my life. Before I became a full-time reader, writer and editor, my job for many years was running large sport and camp programs, particularly for disengaged teens who needed a second chance, if you like. So sport has always been very important to me. And in the Australian Football League, I support the Western Bulldogs down there in Footscray in the western suburbs of Melbourne. The Doggies are my team in Australian football. I just love them to bits, the red, white and the blue. But in the National Rugby League, up here in New South Wales, where I now live, my team is the Penrith Panthers. I am Penrith born and bred, so they are my local team, even though I no longer live in Penrith. But Penrith is where my heart is. It's right at the foot of the Blue Mountains, just west of Sydney. I love the place to bits. It's a really working class area, western suburbs of Sydney. And the Penrith Panthers, their home Guernsey is black, representative of that Black Panther, of course, but really taking in with the comedy, the wonderful, sly, self-effacing humour of that Pink Panther franchise of movies. They've really adopted the Pink Panther as their away from home Guernsey. So for the last decade, this is the Guernsey that we wear when we are playing away from home. And this weekend, we will be playing away from home up there in Brisbane when we take on the might of the Brisbane Broncos in a preliminary final to hopefully win a place in this year's grand final of the National Rugby League. So I am wearing my Pink Panther Guernsey to celebrate this grand occasion. On Sunday afternoon, my Penny Panthers will be taking on the might of the Brisbane Broncos up there in Brisbane, and I am very excited about it. The other reason why I'm wearing the pink in this particular video, if red is the colour associated with communism, and of course ironically Trump's almighty GOP, but if red is the colour of communism, pink has often been seen as the colour, the slightly watered down colour from the red of communism to the pink of socialism. And Stanley Spencer, as well as being a marvellous religious painter, because he was a very fervent, very devout Christian man his whole life. His Christian faith was really the bedrock of his whole experience. He was a marvellous religious painter. He never tired of using his faith and exploring his faith with great colour, whether he was celebrating gardens and wild flowers like this, or painting scenes from the life of Christ and all sorts of other things. He was, a very, very significant 20th century religious painter. So his Christian faith was everything to him. But Stanley Spencer, he would say that because he was a Christian first, but because he was a Christian, one manifestation of his faith in his life, the fruits on his tree, was the fact that he was a socialist. He was a Christian socialist. And for Stanley Spencer, because he was a Christian, he had to be a socialist. He had to have a heart for the poor, for the disadvantaged, for those who were, having a bad time, bad down on their luck. So Stanley Spencer would have really struggled today with that expression of Christianity that has become known as the American evangelical Christian right. And I want to keep things a little bit more humble in this video. I don't want to, put one as being righteous and the other as being completely wicked, which I know I am prone to do. I am a bit of a binary thinker. So if you are a Protestant evangelical Christian that does identify with the Christian right, I would welcome comments down below, and I would love to respond to you and have a gentle, respectful conversation about our different expressions of Christianity. Because for me, I guess I would follow, I don't guess it, I know I would follow Stanley Spencer. I've always identified myself as a Christian socialist. I am a socialist because I am a Christian. And I've always loved that about Stanley Spencer. I've always found him to be a visionary, quite a static religious thinker. I love his paintings. And of course, for Stanley Spencer, his favourite composers were, of course, the also Christian socialist composers over there in England. Great Anglican Christian socialist composers. Gustav Holst, who most famously, of course, composed the Planets Suite, and Ralph Vaughan-Williams. William Vaughan-Williams and Holst were very, very firm friends, and both were devout Christian socialists, particularly Gustav Holst. Sometimes Ralph Vaughan-Williams may have been a little more on the secular side. He was certainly a socialist, but I think he was so firmly and close with people like Gustav Holst that he would have identified most of his life as a Christian socialist as well. And Stanley Spencer was firmly part of that circle of Christian socialism. Stanley Spencer, Gustav Holst, Ralph Vaughan-Williams, the great trinity of 20th century British Christian socialism from a more creative point of view. Of course, from an intellectual point of view, there were great theorists and historians like Raymond Henry or R.H. Tawney. He was a fantastic, one of those scholars right at the beginnings of sociology as an academic subject. Tawney was really important in using his study of economic history to bear to creating this new subject called sociology. So Tawney, if you like, was also a major Christian socialist thinker. And he was, if you like, the intellectual, the theoretical wing to the more creative wing of Holst, Vaughan-Williams and Stanley Spencer. So I'm wearing the pink for my Christian socialism and to represent my beautiful Penny Panthers who are playing in the footy this weekend. Right, let's get down to it. Stanley Spencer. This is the sort of thing he came up with. You can see this wonderful picture on the back cover as well. I've got this wonderful biography of Stanley Spencer here. This is a biography that was actually first published, ironically, in 1991. And 1991 was the first year that my beautiful Penrith Panthers won the National Rugby League Premiership. 1991, what a year. We won the Premiership. And this wonderful biography of Stanley Spencer came out. You can see there that wonderful self-portrait that he painted of himself as a young man when he had no money to afford models. So he just painted himself like so many young artists who start out. You can see the wonderful photograph on the back here where he's got like a pram, he's pushing his easel and he's out painting for a day painting. You can see how formal he was, that wonderful English formality, of literally being dressed in a suit. The collar and tie, the coat, and he's actually out for a day painting. His work, that was, that's what he did for his whole living. But you can see the way he dressed. This book is fully illustrated, but most of the illustrations are black and white, so I won't show you too many of those. But this is the sort of thing that Stanley Spencer came up with. You can see these marvellous religious paintings. Here you've got the Last Supper, and here you've got the resurrection of the dead. He was a real ecstatic, visionary Christian thinker, Stanley Spencer, and he never tired of painting scenes of how he imagined the ecstatic resurrection of the dead at the end times. It's a marvellous religious painting, isn't it? Just wonderful. A delightful use of colour. A lot of self-effacing humour. There's some other things he did, painting his wife and his children. And on this side, you've got another wonderful family portrait. He loved the intimacy, that sort of suburban intimacy of that, the family at home. Here's another marvellous religious painting. Christ delivered to the people. You can see that wonderful image of Christ again. He's an amazing religious painter. Here's another beautiful painting. Another one, the Sabbath Breakers. Another story, another moment in the life of Christ from the Gospels. He just loved painting scenes from the Gospels. And you can see in this what he did. He really did have a sense of the medieval pageant, of the medieval nativity or passion play. So he often had the figures, many of the figures would often be painted in a type of medieval guise, and the way he painted them is very similar to the way they painted the figure in that medieval period. But the backdrop is modern day Cookham, this little village out of London on the upper Thames River. And he just never tired of painting scenes from Cookham, this little village. He just loved that small village. There's another wonderful painting, Christ preaching at Cookham. As I said, he loved painting Christ reimagined into this Cookham. So this is a wonderful biography. If you would like, I'm sure this is not in print anymore as a new book, but it is, what you can see, I've got my copy here from a second-hand shop here, actually when I was living down in Melbourne. So you could probably pick this book up if you're interested in a second-hand arrangement. It's a beautiful biography. You can see it's very detailed. It is quite a brick, but it is wonderfully written. It's a real hoot to read. And he's a marvellous writer, a marvellous painter, an ecstatic Christian man, a Christian thinker. And as I said, he's one of the most important religious painters of the 20th century. He is just much loved. Here's a book, believe it or not, that is totally concentrated on looking at Stanley Spencer in the antipodes. Because even though he was a British painter, Australians and New Zealanders fell in love with Stanley Spencer big time and became big buyers, big purchasers of his paintings, including many of his major oil paintings. So in New Zealand galleries and right across Australia, every state capital gallery in Australia has a good selection of Stanley Spencer paintings as part of their permanent collection. So this whole book is devoted to a celebration of Stanley Spencer in Australia and New Zealand. So all the paintings, all the things I'm going to show you from this beautiful book are from Stanley Spencer works that are housed in Australian and New Zealand galleries. There you go. So there's one, that beautiful image of that sunflower. Marvellous, isn't it? That ecstatic use of yellow. And there's another beautiful intimate portrait of two young lovers. A family portrait again. He loved painting this. He loved painting suburbia and including that, little nuclear family in a garden surrounded by flowers. He really was an ecstatic, visionary, quite Christian thinker, and he loved this sort of scene. There's a lovely portrait of the man at his easel, working in older age, not long before he passed away, actually. There's a marvellous, again, floral scene. He did paint some still lifes, but he more often painted flowers in their garden setting. He really loved the suburban front and backyard. Look at that wonderful portrait of a young woman. he didn't paint a lot of portraits like this in that more realistic sort of style. That's probably a bit of an unusual painting for Stanley Spencer, but it was from his early days. Beautiful use of colour though, isn't it? Look at that lovely portrait again of the man of the easel with his little granddaughter. Marvellous. And there's a beautiful portrait of Stanley Spencer. Again, not long before he passed away. It's a beautiful portrait, isn't it? It's just such a gentle, beautiful face. I love that portrait. That's probably my favourite photo of Stanley Spencer. Here's a beautiful landscape painting that he did, celebrating, that rural Arcadia, that rural landscape around that little village called Cookham on the upper Thames River down there in the south of England. It's marvellous, isn't it? He really is a painter that is so visionary, and almost in every painting you can just see the man. He's in praise of God. He's in celebration mode. I don't think Stanley Spencer had a cynical or negative bone in his body. He was just a painter who wanted to paint celebration. He was always in praise of God. You can see that. Oh, that's that marvellous painting again of the young family. He just loved that, painting families, capturing that familial, that close love. Here again are two beautiful portraits landscapes around Cookham. This one is actually of a lock on the canal system down there near the upper Thames River. And there's another beautiful shot, if you like, of rural Arcadia. He really was this person who just was in praise of the beauty, the grandeur of God's creation. And unsurprisingly, his favourite poet was, of course, Gerald Manley Hopkins, that marvellous Catholic Jesuit priest. What a poet Hopkins was. Oh, and again, Hopkins, just like Spencer, he had that incredible ecstatic vision, didn't he? He was always in praise of God's creation. And that's what you get in Spencer. Another beautiful painting there of the Last Supper. Let me just get this bookmarking because I don't want to miss showing you any of the treasures here. He, as I said, he often painted scenes from the Gospels. He particularly loved the Last Supper and, of course, the Gethsemane scene of Christ in the garden. There's another beautiful landscape around Cookham, just in praise of the glory of God. This is a guy who just never tired of painting celebratory stuff. He was always in praise. Look at the colours in that beautiful garden setting. Oh my goodness, you would never tire, would you, of looking at a painting like that. It's just absolutely marvellous. I just love him to bits. Here's another. Look at this. Again, painting these beautiful, beautiful garden beds. Marvellous use of colour. You can see what I mean. He really is a painter that is just always in celebration mode. He's really just painting the glories of God's creation. Here's another painting here. Parents resurrecting. As I said, he never tired of painting the resurrection scenes as well. He really did have that very ecstatic Christian vision. Here are some more scenes from Christ in the wilderness, if you like. Christ being tempted. These are over there in Perth at the Art Gallery of Western Australia. This, oh my goodness, this is a major oil painting, Christ at Cookham. This is owned as part of the permanent collection of the Art Gallery of New South Wales up there in Sydney. So, Sydney is my closest capital city. It's where I grew up, as I said, in Penrith, just west of Sydney, and you could catch the train into the city. And I have spent many, many hours in front of this painting in the Art Gallery of New South Wales permanent collection. It is a much loved painting at the gallery in Sydney there, and it is a beautiful major oil painting, Christ at Cookham. You can see here the judgmental person here. You can see all the disciples, the children playing hopscotch, and you can see Christ sitting over here on the ground, with all the disciples on their chairs. And all the disciples look very quizzical, very stern, trying to work out, I think, what's going on. And you've got this ecstatic vision, because he really loved this idea of the wonderful fool. He also loved, there was that Japanese Catholic writer and thinker, Shūsako Endō. And as well as writing a lot of novels set around the introduction of Catholicism into Japan, Endō wrote a beautiful book, a meditation on the life of Christ called A Wonderful Fool. It's a wonderful theological reimagining of Christ into that medieval and modern day type Japanese context. You know, what would it be like if Christ visited Japan? It's a wonderful celebration of Japanese Catholicism, if you like. And another writer who Stanley Spencer loved, as well as Hopkins, was Shūsako Endō, that wonderful Japanese Catholic thinker and writer. So this is a real beautiful portrait, if you like, of Christ as the wonderful fool. It's a wonderful painting, this. The detail in it, the sense of joy, the praise, you know, there's just so much going on there. It's a very, very dramatic portrait as well, I think. Marvelous, marvelous painting. And because I have spent so much time with Stanley Spencer, I have also written in my current collection called Cactus, there is an ekphrastic poem in response to a lifetime spent viewing the work of Stanley Spencer. You know, I've travelled, like I've gone to many galleries in search of Rosalie Gascoigne, that wonderful Australian assemblage artist who I looked at in a few videos back. I've also, you know, travelled Sydney, Melbourne, Adelaide, Perth, Brisbane, Hobart, chasing the line of all these paintings by Stanley Spencer as well. So I have now seen, you know, even though I've never got to England, I have seen many, I have been able to introduce myself to many paintings, including major paintings like that Christ at Cookham. I've been able to introduce myself to some of these marvellous Stanley Spencer paintings, because there are just so many of these paintings owned by the galleries in Australia. So my poem is called Call Me Legion. And it really is riffing off a lot of this Christian theology, as I said, you know, looking at, you know, comparing the Christian right, particularly in that evangelical sense of supporting Trump's almighty GOP and all that sort of business, with a more Christian socialist. So it is comparing, contrasting different ways of being Christian in the world. And I don't want to come across as being too negative or critical of what is called the Christian right, you know, that evangelical movement that is supportive of Trump. I realize that I need to be more humble. I need to be more quiet and listen to people. So if you do have a different theological point of view on this to me, I would really welcome, you know, respectful comments down below. And I would love to go into conversation with you and learn from you. You know, I know I don't have all the answers. You know, I am a Christian socialist in the manner of Stanley Spencer. But I do realize there are other ways in this world of expressing your Christian faith. And I need to be aware and more sensitive of that as well. But my poem is called Call Me Legion, after Stanley Spencer's painting, Christ at Cookham, Christ calling his disciples, and Christ in the wilderness. They're the particular paintings that I used as my trigger for this poem. Call Me Legion. This is my love affair with Stanley Spencer. I am again reading some apocryphal gospels on gallery walls, searching for Stanley's traces of a kind and wonderful fool amidst all this 21st century's muscular Christianity. For Stanley, the Cookham 12 are belligerent players, their cross-armed biceps bullying a child's hopscotch to fenced-in edges. He anticipated the rise of evangelicals as overheated harvesters who order their empty baskets out to a loop of wind and willow while still raising a host to pleasant escapades, diverting charges of hypocrisy with cosy woolen jumpers and squashy cushions, sowing the seeds of their righteous nostalgia. Whatever happened to stray innocence of heart, to bumbling along a path with disciples left enlightened? Now Christ is really in the wilderness, condemned to sackcloth, where even the resurrection is a comfort banished to the parameters of their moral majority. I guess that is a poem that is a little bit angry. It is a poem that is a little bit, in supporting the vision of Stanley Spencer, his vision of Christian socialism. I guess that is a poem written in the context of Trump's first presidency, and it is, I guess, a little bit angry. I do really struggle with that Christian right expression of Christianity, the gospel of prosperity. I do really struggle with that type of way of being a Christian in the world. Christian nationalism, as it's often called today. That Calvinistic way of looking at God's relationship with certain types of people. I really struggle with that. And maybe this is something that I need to take on board and grow and change with. At the moment, my expression of Christian faith is very much along the lines of Stanley Spencer, his wonderful religious paintings around Cookham. I would see myself very much as this pinko Christian socialist. So yes, I am willing to learn. I am willing to be quiet, be a little bit more humble and listen and talk to people. So if you have a different way of being Christian in the world, I would love to hear from you. We could have a respectful dialogue and educate one another. You with your expression maybe of being a pro-Trumper, right-wing evangelical Christian with the gospel of prosperity, if that's where you come from, and my Christian socialism. Maybe we could have a respectful dialogue with one another, and we could learn from each other. I am really keen to open things up and learn. I know my way of being a Christian in the world is not the only way. So I hope you've enjoyed this video, spending a little bit of time. I might go on this one, actually, that wonderful self-portrait. I hope you've enjoyed spending this time with me and maybe getting a new experience with the wonderful Christian religious painter, the ecstatic visionary Stanley Spencer. He's a marvellous mid-late 20th century English painter. He just was amazing. Just like Hopkins in his poetry, he never tired of being in praise of God's wonderful creation. This is a person who did not have a cynical or critical bone in his body. He was this ecstatic visionary. So thank you and bye for now.